I'm sure we'll have a DA president in the not too distant future.
Zille Mbalula does say that a fundamental error that the DA committed was going to court on this matter. How do you feel about that?
We've got a terrible problem of poverty in South Africa. And poverty can't be solved by more social grants. It has to be solved by more jobs. I'm here to make sure the DA succeeds. If the DA fails, South Africa fails. It's as simple as that. If it wasn't for our court case, you would have had a VAT increase on the 1st of May. It's as simple as that. And let me explain to Zille Mbalula why.
Is the 2nd of May. If everything actually happened in the way Minister Godongwana and the ANC actually had planned, by yesterday, probably a VAT hike would have been passed and all of that. But in this video, Helen Zille is blazing really hot, actually arguing and trying to really inform the public on why she thinks that the ANC doesn't need to be angry with them. Apparently, the ANC is actually angry that the DA took this whole case about the VAT hike to court. In other words, it appears that the ANC expected both the ANC and the DA to have an out-of-court settlement instead of this whole brouhaha of the AFF getting a lawyer to represent the EFF and the DA getting a lawyer to represent the DA to fight the VAT hike in court in South Africa. And so apparently Fikile Mbalula, as you heard in the video, actually said that he actually thinks that was a fundamental mistake that the DA made, which was to take that case to court. And for me, for him to use that language that was a mistake, I think it has a repercussory intonation. In other words, it almost appears that there might be a punishment for the DA for taking this whole thing to court, so to speak. So this is how I'm hearing it and just trying to make my own analysis. But Helen Zille in this video is actually blazing hot, actually arguing that, without the fact that the DA, rose up and decided to push for a court settlement for this whole issue, that yesterday there would have been a VAT bill passed, to which South Africans, maybe on the 2nd, which is today, would now have been slowly trying to really, get normal or normalize the reality that there's now a VAT increase. But let's quickly listen to Helen Zille really break down some of these issues on her response to Fikile Mbalula on his anger that he feels that the biggest mistake the DA made was taking this whole VAT issue to court.
Today being the 30th of April, to Secretary General of the ANC, Fikile Mbalula, giving a press statement. And in that press statement, he does say that a fundamental error that the DA committed was going to court on this matter. How do you feel about that?
Well, if it wasn't for our court case, you would have had a VAT increase on the 1st of May. It's as simple as that. And let me explain to Fikile Mbalula why. The minister announced that there would be a VAT increase. It was included in the fiscal framework. In the portfolio on the 1st of April, the ANC, along with smaller parties such as RISE, BOSA, Action South Africa, etc., voted the fiscal framework through using a completely incorrect process, but they voted it through. Then it went to Parliament, and Action South Africa, RISE, BOSA, and all smaller parties, including the IFP and others, helped the ANC to get the fiscal framework through Parliament. Now, once the fiscal framework is through Parliament, which happened on the 2nd of April, only two things can stop the VAT hike going through. One is a court order, which is what we got, which is why there won't be a VAT hike. And the other would have been a new fiscal framework that went through the same process as the old one, which would have been impossible to get through by the 1st of May. So if it wasn't for our court case, there would be a VAT increase on the 1st of May. We've got a terrible problem of poverty in South Africa. And poverty can't be solved by more social grants. It has to be solved by more jobs. And it's not governments that create jobs, it's the private sector. And people with capital and skills can invest anywhere in the world. And we've got to make them want to choose South Africa. And for them to choose South Africa, we have to understand what is stopping them from choosing South Africa and get those obstacles out of the way. Now, we know very well what they are. Unreliable electricity supply was number one. I'm sure it's about to be overtaken by an unreliable water supply. No one is going to invest in a country where you aren't sure of getting electricity 24/7 and where you aren't sure of getting clean water. You can't live in those circumstances. You can't work in those circumstances. And then crucially, they want to know all the other things. I mean, if the ANC government is going to take a third of your business right there before you begin because of some BEE law, you're not going to look at that country. You're not going to look at South Africa. You're going to go somewhere else where no one's going to take away a third of your business. And when no one's going to tell you who to hire and who to fire. And no one's going to put all kinds of bureaucratic obstacles in your way. And then, of course, you have the Expropriation Act. Now, if any international investor, and that's what we need more than anything else, was to look at South Africa and then read Section 12 of the Expropriation Act, they would say, no way. I could invest in this country and just now somebody comes and expropriates my entire investment. So we've got to understand no one is forced to invest in South Africa. They do that if we are a better investment destination than the thousands of other places that are competing for that same investment. And until we get that into our heads, we must understand that social engineering isn't going to work. Governments can't prescribe investment. They can only create conditions for investment to happen.
Helen, talk to me about the personal toll that this has taken on you. I mean, the fight has been hard. It's just started potentially.
This has been very easy, Bronwyn. I mean, I don't want to sound blasé but I've only got one job now, and you don't know what a difference that makes. I mean, when I was mayor, I was the mother of two challenging adolescent sons, and they were challenging. I was the mayor and running a 7-party coalition, and I was the leader of the party. Now that was challenging. And I'd often work right through the night to get my stuff done. It was easier being the premier and the leader than being the mayor, because we had an overall majority, so I wasn't dealing with the huge complexity of running a coalition. But when I became the chair of the Federal Council of the DA, that's just one job. And the DA has tremendous capacity. I can't tell you what wonderful support I have in the DA's federal head office. So literally I get enough sleep now, which I've never done before, and it's an absolute blessing. I mean, I don't know where the sleep comes from. And I run an 8-hour day, sometimes 9, maybe even 10 at a push, but it's totally manageable.
There are a lot of people out there saying, Helen for president. How do you respond to them?
No. I'm here to make sure the DA succeeds. If the DA fails, South Africa fails. It's as simple as that. I know I'm obviously not objective about the DA, but the only reason that I've put my whole life into the DA is because I know it's the difference between success or failure for South Africa. And I see my job in South Africa's history as to put the DA into the best possible position to take the next step. I'm sure we'll have a DA president in the not too distant future. It won't be me, but I hope that I will have paved the way for that to happen.
Helen Zille actually argues also, I think probably the ANC has been trying to really fight, or settle this whole thing with poverty in South Africa through grants or SASSA, if you get me. And so Helen Zille is actually arguing that South Africa's poverty cannot be erased by SASSA. SASSA can only go to some extent. But in order to fight poverty in South Africa, there has to be what she feels that the private sector is actually, has to be a player in that whole thing about creating jobs and not the government. The government would not be able to, provide the amount of jobs. I think that, I was even listening to the Labour chairperson today. I think he was actually speaking that the unemployment rate in South Africa is almost now reaching 42%, you see, and so that's a really crazy number. Helen Zille argues that they have to make South Africa, a really investment attractive place so that people can actually come in and invest rather than having laws. She explained this section 12. And I was thinking to maybe go through this section 12 of the Expropriation Act to really see what it says. This section 12(1) of the Act says that the Act provides that the amount of compensation paid to the owner of expropriated land must be just and equitable, reflecting an equitable balance between the public interest, the interest of those affected, including an owner, holder of a right, or mortgagee, having regard to all relevant circumstances. In other words, if I'm actually able to just really interpret this correctly, it says that whenever a land is expropriated, the amount of compensation, that must be paid to the owner of the expropriated land, must be just and equitable, and it must reflect an equitable balance between public interest and the interest of those affected, including the owner or probably the holder of one who has a right to a mortgagee. I don't know really. It says having regard of relevant circumstances. I think it's quite a complicated one. It says these circumstances also include the current use of the property. So in order to expropriate, right, and have a right compensation for any land that's been expropriated, it says the circumstances that must be taken, relevant circumstances that must be taken regard are: 1, current use of the property; 2, the history of the acquisition and the use of the property; 3, the market value of the property; and 4, the extent of direct state investment and subsidy in the acquisition and beneficial capital and improvement of the property and the purpose of the expropriation. So this section 12 is actually where I think Helen Zille and the DA have a problem with this Expropriation Act, and they argue that any investor who actually wants to come in and invest in South Africa, the moment they read this section 12, this whole thing with expropriation, the complexities around, having how that means if somebody buys land, for example, now in South Africa, an investor, for example, maybe from Sweden, comes in South Africa, buys lands, wants to build a factory and all that. If there are negotiations around it that has to result in the expropriation of that land, it's gonna be a hit to that investor. And so this is what Helen Zille is actually arguing, that this Expropriation Act, this section 12 of the Act, is keeping investors away from South Africa. And it's making the South African environment a less attractive space. So even though the investor could be convinced that, this your land is, there's no need to fear and all of that, the investor in their subconscious has this understanding when they come to this section of the Act that, who knows, probably if I invest all my money, for example, buy some piece of land and all of that, who knows if one day this land is expropriated and, the destruction and the loss. So investors are actually being pushed away. So this is the argument from the DA and their fight against this whole thing with the VAT hike, the expropriation bill, and for now. And so Helen Zille is actually also saying that, she believes that at some point South Africa will have a DA president, but it might not be now. But, one of the things that the DA stands for is the fact that, they think that if the DA fails, especially in this GNU, and South Africa will fail. And so she's really ready to fight, even give her life, in this fight, especially for the DA, to uphold the DA into where it would eventually come to a place in South Africa's political economy where it can really now have a strong footing, because the DA's footing now is shaky and threatened in the GNU, where people are actually thinking that probably if Paul Mashatile replaces or takes over or succeeds President Ramaphosa, then we might see the end of the DA in the GNU. And what then becomes of the DA in this kind of eventuality? Bro, it's really important to think about, and share your thoughts in the comments.